welcome to our second session in American English Live Series 23. My name is Dr. Darlene Wiggins Dockery. Now for today's webinar, Empowering Students, Techniques to Promote Self-Regulated Learning in the Classroom. Self-regulated learning empowers students to manage their learning by motivating themselves, setting clear goals, creating actionable plans, and conducting self-assessments. This webinar will share practical strategies for promoting SRL in the classroom. Participants will discover techniques such as SMART goals, vision boards, and self reflection tools to help students build motivation, develop learning habits, and monitor their own progress. By the end of the session, participants will be equipped with actionable strategies they can use in the classroom to support student independence and foster lifelong learning skills through self regulated learning practices. And we are pleased to introduce our presenter, Dr. Linh Phung. Lynn is a language educator, researcher, and creator with experience directing successful educational programs and developing language learning materials and educational technology. She is the founder of Eduling app, which offers specialized English courses built around communicative tasks and games. Lynn has published 4 language learning books and 3 children's books, and her research has been published in high impact journals. Her professional experience also involves serving as an English language specialist for the U.S. Department of State in 2023. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Darlene, for the introduction, and hello to everyone from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's my pleasure to present empowering students techniques to promote self-regulated learning in the classroom today. This is my second time presenting through American English Live, and I have also had the pleasure, as you can see in the picture, to present to teachers in Vietnam to the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi. I love the idea that the world is our classroom, whether it is online or in person. So today, this is the agenda for you. First, I will define self-regulated learning, and then we are going to explore different components of self-regulated learning. As we explore these components, I will be sharing techniques and strategies to promote students' self-regulated learning. Finally, I will be wrapping up the session and discuss some takeaways with you. First, let's hear from you. If you can share in the chat or in the commenting box, you list one way teachers can help students feel more in charge of their own learning.
Okay, so right away, we want your ideas. What is one way that teachers can help students feel more in charge of their own learning? What are your ideas for that? Okay, so Lynn, this is exciting because we want our students to be lifelong learners, and that starts with self regulated learning. And so we are looking forward to our participants' comments on this question. Okay, so we are having some responses coming in. One of our audience members is saying, give them options for what they can do for a topic or for an activity. And Karima says, project work is a way that we can help students to feel more in charge of their own learning. Then we heard from Sunshine. Sunshine says journaling is a way. Falagi says classroom projects. Olga says to do self assessments. And then we heard from Than Lee, who says teamwork activities, allowing the students to work in pairs. Wilbert says involving them in learning by asking open ended questions. So we see our teachers already have a lot of ideas for how to help their students be in charge of learning. And I'm sure they'll be ready to implement the ones that you share. Back to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Darlene, for sharing those comments from our participants. Those are all great ideas for sure. And I love the idea of giving choice. But I hope that through this session, you will also see that we can give them structure throughout the activities also. So let's move on. Let's start by asking what is self-regulated learning? And we are going to unpack the term here. First, the concept of self. This simply means you, the learner. It's about your own thoughts, actions, and decisions. Regulation is about managing or controlling something. In this case, it's about managing your own learning processes. And learning is the process of gaining knowledge and skills. In language learning, it is about developing language skills for personal, professional, or academic purposes. So, putting these together, self regulated learning means you're managing your own learning. You decide what to learn, plan how to do it, stay motivated, track how it's going, and adjust your approach if needed. As a teacher, we actually play a role in promoting our students' self regulated learning. Now, let's look at this definition from a really renowned scholar in this topic, Zimmerman. Self regulated learning involves how learners cognitively, motivationally, and behaviorally promote their own academic achievements. As you can see, I highlighted some key terms here for you. But in simple terms, it means that students need to pay attention and think about their learning. They need to have reasons for their learning activities, which gives them motivation. Behaviorally, they need to take actions. And overall, they need to take active ownership of their learning. Now, you may ask, of course, the big question here is how do we promote self regulated learning? In this presentation, I'm going to share with you a systematic approach created by Dr. Hayo Riders in a position paper with Oxford University Press, with the contribution of three other experts, including myself. And when you look at these components and think about how to promote your students' self-regulated learning, think about techniques and strategies along these components. They include motivation for self-regulated learning, identifying needs, setting goals, making plans, task regulation, how to manage learning tasks, and self-assessment positioned in the middle of the framework here. Now it's your turn again. What are some challenges associated with helping students develop self-regulated learning or study skills in your context?
So you've already given us a lot of ideas of activities you can do to promote it, but what challenges have you faced in trying to get your students to be self regulated in their learning? Again, what are some challenges associated with helping students develop self regulated learning or study skills? Let us hear from you. Okay, so while we are waiting for our responses to come in, we have a comment, um, and the comment is creating the environment that fosters autonomy can be a challenge. Oswaldo says shyness and low self confidence can be a challenge. Then we heard from Brad, and Brad says mixed ability or large classes can be a challenge.
Mhm.
Olga says integrating SRL into a prescribed syllabus. is a challenge. We've heard from Lynn, who says they are not as disciplined as we expect sometimes. Chandrahas, please forgive me for mispronouncing your name, said lack of motivation can be a challenge. Then we heard from Asia. Asia says crowded classroom plays a crucial role in this. So, again, those large classrooms can be a challenge. So, those are some of the responses from our audience. Thank you for your responses and for your engagement. Back to you, Lynn.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your challenges. I do understand these challenges, and that's why we are here together to think of some solutions. And I hope that some of the ideas that I'm sharing will be addressing some of those. So let's move on. Let's talk about the first component here, motivation for self-regulated learning. You may ask, how do I motivate my students to self-regulate their learning, right? And the first step that we can do here is to help them understand what self-regulated learning is and its benefits. And if you need to give a simple definition, it's about taking active ownership of their learning, taking charge of their learning. You can also emphasize the importance of lifelong learning. And my suggestion here for you is to set an example as a teacher. As teachers, we learn all the time. We learn new techniques to create new activities. We learn new ways to create interesting materials. With new tech tools, I'm sure that you're learning about new tools all the time, Google Doc, video editing tools to create materials for your students. So by setting an example, you motivate your students to do the same. And actually, research has shown that teacher and parent growth mindsets influence self-regulated learning. Let me also share with you a motivational activity here. When you want to motivate students for language learning, you may engage them in creating a vision board for themselves. In this case, a vision board is a collage of images of how students want to use English in the future. So first, they can define their intentions clearly. In this case, it's about how they are going to use English in the future. They can imagine the different roles, the different situations that they will be using English in the future. Then they can gather supplies like a board or glue or scissors. And the next important step is to find visuals that can inspire them. And the visuals can come from any printed materials, can be newspapers, magazines, handouts that they see. After they have those visuals, they can arrange and assemble them on the board. Having visuals is important because it helps them to visualize and to envision their future more vividly. After they have the board, they can place it where they will see it. It can be in the bedroom or it can be in the office. And as they look at the vision board, they can also reflect on their process of getting to their vision and also update those visuals as necessary. Okay, so I'm moving on to the next component here. It is about identifying needs. As language teachers, you may agree with me that one of our main goals is to develop students' language needs. It's one of our main jobs, right? It is about developing the language and the skills for them to use the target language for their current situations or for future use. However, while we do this, we can also help them to be more aware of their own needs. And in this case, language related needs and learning related needs. As definitions, you can think of language-related needs as specific skills learners want to improve in the target language, such as vocabulary, grammar, listening, speaking, reading, or writing. In terms of learning-related needs, you can think of them as strategies and habits that support effective learning, like setting goals, staying motivated, tracking progress, and seeking feedback. Other examples of learning related needs can include expanding vocabulary, understanding complex text, listening to natural speech. And again, learning related needs can include setting clear goals, staying motivated, and tracking progress. To help students to do this, you can ask them to complete self-assessment checklists. And I remember that one of you mentioned self-assessments. Yes, it is a powerful tool to help students to understand their own needs and also to identify what they can improve. In this example, you can see that a high-level student may complete this form to say that they can understand the main ideas of conversations. They can write clear paragraphs with examples. They can use everyday vocabulary confidently, or they can speak well in group discussions. However, the student can also identify what they need to improve, and this is the important part in terms of assessing their own language learning needs. They identify that they need to follow fast natural speech, they need to use more complex sentences, they need to learn academic words, and they need to participate more in group discussions. For lower level learners, instead of asking them to complete a form like that, a somewhat open-ended form like that, you can ask them to maybe circle a tick or a cross. And this list is actually inspired by my 6-year-old daughter who is learning Vietnamese here and there. So I can ask her to assess her needs in a very simple way by circling a tick or a cross. I can ask her whether she can recognize 10 animal names in Vietnamese, which she does, that I know, whether she can say basic greetings in Vietnamese, and whether she can ask for a few things in Vietnamese. So this is a very simple idea of engaging lower level students in identifying their needs. Now it's your turn again. We'd love to learn more about your students. What are some of the language learning needs they currently have?
What are some of the language learning needs that your students currently have? And we have already been exposed to some wonderful ways that we can help students to identify those needs and measure their progress. Before we get to the responses, though, Lynn, I wanted to share a couple of comments with you. We heard from Rosetta, who says, beautiful. I love the vision board technique. Can I, as the teacher, use this amazing technique?
Definitely. It is used by, I think, everyone in every field because it's really a motivational technique for you to envision your future. And visualization is a good technique for motivation. But you can go a little bit further. I heard another technique related to the vision board that after you create the vision board, you can also imagine your future self writing a letter to your current self. So these are different motivational techniques that help you to take more actions to achieve your
No.
goals.
Oh, Lynn, I have to tell you, I recently cleaned out a storage unit and found an old vision board. And on it, there was a picture that said, she wants the PhD. And it was an image of that. And I
Yes.
was so excited because I did that before I completed my PhD. And that vision board really helped to keep it in front of me. Here are
Yeah.
some other comments. Um, Amelia said, motivate our students is very important. Gabby says the rubric can help for self assessments here in my context. And now we also have some responses to what are some of the language and learning needs they currently have. Brad said, improve their speaking and writing skills. Isabella says, improve the spoken part. Zenny says, my students need to enlarge their vocabulary visually or memorizing with practice. Akram says, self vocabulary. Tina, my students want to improve listening skills, but they seldom listen to audio. And then we heard from Sameh, who said grammar for communication. Jay says the language and learning needs that his students currently have are to be brave, to speak English in daily life. So those are some of the responses and challenges and language learning needs that our participant students have. Back to you, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I do understand that there are a lot of needs, and that's why we are here as a teacher. And actually, needs assessment is such an important step in any curriculum development. So I'm sure you know about students' needs and gather data about it. The idea here is also to engage them in identifying their needs, right? So this is to promote the self-regulated learning when they are more aware of their needs instead of us telling them what they need all the time.
Mhm.
Moving on to learning related needs, if we want to develop students' learning related needs, the first step can be to understand what learning involves. So you can explain to students and talk to students about how we learn. You can share the information about how our brain grows as we learn and our intelligence is not fixed. And this is an important concept because growth mindset is basically the belief that our intelligence is not fixed. It can improve as we learn. So you can share this insight with students and even images about how the brain grows, right? And also, you can share some information with students about our memory. We have three types of memory: sensory memory, where information is registered through our senses; our short-term memory, where information is stored for a short time; and our long-term memory, where information is stored more permanently and can be retrieved later in the future. By sharing this information, you can emphasize that students need to pay attention. If they want their information to register through their senses, they need to pay attention. They also need to rehearse regularly so that the information can be stored long term and they can retrieve it later for future use. And with that information, you can also help students to make a plan to review past lessons. Students can make a plan to review their lesson immediately after it, or after a short time, like after a week, or after a longer time, like after a month. If they have a plan like this, it's impossible to forget. But if they don't, then we forget information very easily. Our memory actually dips like a cliff when we don't review information regularly. So, to recall information from memory, you can point out that students can do this through low stake quizzes or by summarizing what they have learned to others or by teaching the information to others. And actually, teaching is one of the best ways to learn. You need to know the information, but also need to know how to communicate the information to others. The next idea that I want to share you is to form productive learning habits. Habits are powerful because habits can keep us going even when the motivation is low or when the motivation is up and down. So I want to share this quote with you because I really love the idea that whatever you practice will grow. Self regulated learning is about how we integrate learning into our lives. And to help students form new habits, I want to share 5 tips with you. I have shared these tips in videos, but I want to share this with you. To form a new habit, try it consistently for a period of time, preferably for 30 days or 4 weeks. That's the common advice. Also, have a schedule and check if you have done it. You have an idea, you need to do it, you are doing it, you have done it, then check on the schedule. And you can see on the screen here, I have a very simple schedule of the 7 days of the week and different weeks. So you can put a check mark. It's satisfying to be doing it, but please do it. And another idea or tip is to set reminders or notes so that you hear the alarm and it reminds you to do it, or you see the notes and it reminds you to do it. You can also attach the new activity to an activity that you enjoy. If you love drinking coffee in the morning, then maybe immediately after doing it or while doing it, you take a lesson, a short lesson, or review some vocabulary. And after the action, reward yourself with something small. Maybe watching a small TikTok video, or don't spend too much time on it, but watch a video to reward yourself. So those are the 5 tips that I want to share with you that can be useful for your students. Now it's your turn again. We are talking about learning habits, right? Learning behaviors. Have you noticed any effective study habits or practices among your students?
Okay, so just as we are learning from you when you participate, I am sure that you are noticing things your students are already doing to improve their study skills and their ability to speak, listen, and do the 4 skills in English. So, have you noticed any effective study habits or practices among your students? Please let us know. And while we are waiting for those comments to come in, Lynn, I have some comments to share with you. We heard from Sammy who said, can you give us of an example of which habits? I think some of those habits questions have been answered in what you said before. So hang in there, Sammy. You will hear some more. Then we heard a comment that was from Brad, and Brad said, "Wonderful ideas. Thank you." We heard from another participant who says, it's important to remind them that intelligence is not fixed, and that motivates them to keep trying. And now we have some responses to have you noticed any effective study habits or practices among your students? Holly says, creating daily plans. Cicely says, finishing the KWL table after class. Sammy says some students write keywords or make small summaries. Then we heard from Gabby, who said, anticipate what are they going to do and to learn to help with their habits. Sunshine said self-recordings of what they've learned as a form of video journaling. Then Olga has seen her students playing grammar and vocabulary games online. And Neha has says learning journals. Janet says talking in English out of the classroom every day. As students of a foreign language, we practice to gather vocabulary, good pronunciation, and production. We heard from Nira, who says talking to the mirror. That's a good one. And then we heard from Gora, creating an English club. Gamulia says practice new words using apps. So
Mhm.
their students are already using some strategies and creating habits. That's good to hear. Thank you for your participation. And back to you, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you so much for all those wonderful activities that your students are doing. And imagine that they are doing more of that. Or imagine that there's something new that you want your students to do. Yes, playing vocabulary games and grammar games is useful, but what if they want to improve their speaking? Then speaking is important. So I love some of the ideas in terms of recording themselves, even talking to the mirror or talking to someone else. And imagine again, if they want to improve speaking and they do it every day, you can see how their speaking skills can grow. Now we are moving on to 2 very important components, setting goals and making plans. And I want to present them together to emphasize the idea that these goals and plans have to be specific. Or you can think of this acronym SMART. Perhaps you have heard of it. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. So goals and plans should meet these criteria. And I want to give you an example here. A student may have this goal, and I know many students that I work with have this goal. achieving an IELTS score of 6.5 by December to improve my English proficiency for studying abroad. And you can see that this goal is specific enough because it is focused on IELTS and studying abroad. It is measurable because you can decide whether the student will be attaining it by December or not, whether they get a 6.0 or not. It is attainable if their level is around 6.0. This is important, and this is how teachers can also advise students. It is relevant because it supports English learning and academic plans, and it is time bound. There's a deadline here, or there's a specific time here by which the students want to achieve the goal. In terms of making plans and setting goals, I want to introduce this really interesting technique with you. It is called WOOP. And it is actually a technique that is common in many fields, in many walks of life. It is special in that it uses what is called mental contrasting by engaging students in imagining a positive outcome and a positive feeling of achieving the outcome, immediately followed by visualizing an obstacle, an internal obstacle. So that is interesting, and it has been used in many fields, including education. So wish means a challenging but achievable goal. Outcome is the best outcome coming from achieving the goal. It can be a positive feeling. An obstacle is an internal obstacle that prevents the achievement of the goal. And a plan in this case is advised to be more specific in terms of an if then plan to overcome the obstacle. So let me give you an example, and I'm sure that after this presentation, it will be even more motivating for me to do this. I am learning Spanish here and there, but if I and now I'm sitting down and setting some WOOP plan here, I want to listen and understand simple Spanish songs because I feel that if I achieve that and I do that, I will enjoy the music so much and I will learn Spanish even more. But the obstacle is that I'm not doing that so much. Every day I'm not doing it. So the plan here is my plan now internally, and I have written down here is when I finish a Spanish lesson on my phone, which I do, then I'll also listen to a song. So that is an example of a WOOP technique that you can use. The advice is that you try doing it yourself first, and then you can use a form like this to help your students through the process. I have seen some comments in the chat with a similar idea that students can also make daily and weekly plans. The important point here again is that it has to be specific in terms of what you will do, when, where, and with whom you will do it. And you can also make an if and then plan. What will you do if you run into an obstacle? And again, a checklist or a plan of some kind will be very useful. Okay, so now we are coming to an important component in the framework called task regulation. In English language learning or in language learning, there are a lot of learning tasks, and you have mentioned a lot of them. In other areas, there are academic tasks that students have to complete. So these ideas of task regulation coming into play here. The students need to be able to select resources that are useful for task completion. They also need to be able to apply task-related strategies. In this case, the steps that they need to take, what they need to do first, what they need to do next, and then they need to be able to monitor progress, right? And when they monitor progress, they can do it with checklists, or you can help them to build checklists, or they can do learning logs. So some of you mentioned journals, and the journals may be about the learning process itself. I want to share with you this example of a checklist when students prepare for a presentation. And it's pretty simple. Just list the steps and the things that students need to make sure to do, and they can put a check mark next to it. And you can see that in this checklist, there are some principles that support self-regulated learning also, like seeking feedback or reflect on their improvement, or also some steps to motivate themselves, right? I feel confident and ready to present. That is also preparing themselves motivationally and emotionally. For me, I often share strategies with students. So if you notice that some strategies are helpful and some strategies that may not be helpful, then you can also share strategies with students. For example, to help students to improve pronunciation, I have a really short video explaining key pronunciation features, including vowels, consonants, syllable stress, word stress, intonation. The point is that to help them to know more than maybe a few areas that they notice. Also, I introduced this technique by using gestures to pronounce multisyllabic words because without knowing the technique, students may not ever use this really useful technique. And I introduce other practice techniques as well. And here's the idea. If you want students to learn beyond the classroom and carry out these activities beyond the classroom, sometimes you have to teach them how to do it. And sharing strategies is a good idea here in terms of promoting self-regulated learning and learning beyond the classroom. Now it's your turn. Imagine your students are preparing a short presentation on a familiar topic, such as their favorite hobby or recent experience. What strategies would you teach or model to help them plan, practice, and deliver their presentation confidently?
Okay, so we want to know what strategies would you teach or model to help your students plan, practice, and deliver their presentation confidently? And while those responses are coming in, Lynn, I want to tell you I love acronyms. So SMART goals are easy to remember, as well as the new one you introduced to me today, WOOP. I
Yeah,
love it. I
yeah,
love it.
thank you. I love it too.
And we also have some other participants who are excited about this session. We heard from Shantra Dradhas, who says, I love this session. Smart Study says, I love this webinar. Hercules says, I love this webinar. So you have fans, Lynn. And
Thank you.
then we heard from Kanul, who said, this is a great technique. I'll try this with Spanish and Italian because I'm also learning them here and there.
Mhm.
A response to the question, what strategies would you teach or model to help your students plan, practice, and deliver their presentation confidently? Holly says, skills related to public speaking. Chandraha says, clapping exercises, color coding, highlight stressed syllables in red, for example, or unstressed in blue. Sunshine said, demonstrate or give an outline of the structure they can use as an example. And then we heard from Camila, who says, make many presentations in groups so then they could practice between pairs. And also, it could be nice if the students could evaluate their pairs also. Oswaldo says, when presenting something, they first practice with the teacher to receive feedback, then they go public. And finally, we are hearing from Baba Kaur, who says the trial run approach. So,
Mm.
those are some of the things that our teachers in our audience are doing to help our students, their students, to practice and deliver their presentations with confidence. Back to you, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I can see that this is where your expertise and experience really shine here because that's what we do. We help our students to complete these academic tasks and these language learning tasks. And again, some of you say that you don't have time maybe to address self-regulated learning if the curriculum is prescribed, but you can see that we can put in some activities to help them to monitor their own progress, a checklist where they can use to check what they have done. So I hope you now have seen that we can integrate some self-regulated learning activities into the way you are already teaching your students. Okay, so you mentioned feedback, and feedback is important for several reasons, right? Students can use peer feedback and teacher feedback to know their needs, their language learning needs, but they also can use it to improve their task performance. So I want to share this idea with you because the idea here is that feedback actually doesn't lead to learning. Engagement is where learning happens. This is the idea that if you spend a lot of time giving extensive feedback, but if the students are not even engaging with them, then learning is not happening. So engagement with the feedback is where learning happens. So what can we do? I want to give you an example here. This is an example taken from my experience with some modification here. The assignment here as part of a speaking class is for the student or students to submit a voice recording describing a painting. After the students submitted their recordings, I listened to the recordings. I actually looked at the transcript of the recording because with technology, we can do it easily. I also looked at the feedback that the AI has already given to the student. And then I provided further feedback. And you can see some of the language there. Thanks for submitting the recording. You did a good job describing the painting with enough details and good vocabulary. What you need to improve the most is organization, grammar, and pronunciation. And then I give some specific suggestion here in terms of using transition words to connect ideas at the end of the speech. In terms of grammar, I actually refer the students back to the AI feedback because it actually does a pretty good job of pointing out the errors. For pronunciation, I also suggest students to check difficult words, and I list the words that she didn't pronounce correctly there. So overall, if you want to use this approach, you can follow the steps that I have here. Of course, you have to review their recording, the transcript if you have it, the AI feedback if you have it, and then you provide additional written and audio feedback. In my case, I did provide some audio feedback because I wanted to pronounce the words, to say the words that my students mispronounced. And then in class, we discussed the feedback. I asked them to look at my feedback again. We discussed the feedback and we practiced weak areas for all of the students. Then I asked the students to do the recording again. Sometimes I ask them to do it in class, and sometimes I do ask them to do it out of class. So I just want to share that this is actually good use of your class time, because if you give feedback and students are not engaged in it, then learning is not happening. Finally, now we have come to the last component of this framework, self-assessment. And you can see that it is in the middle of the framework because you can think of it as assessment of all other components. As teachers, we can help learners to reflect on their learning process. And these are some really simple but useful questions that you can ask students consistently, or they can answer themselves consistently. What was the lesson about? What did I learn? What made it difficult? What's next? You can use Google Forms or exit tickets. And in my case, when I ran a conversation exchange program for 14 weeks, and we had weekly live conversations, at the end of each session, I actually sent a Google form to the students and asked them to complete the first 3 questions. And the information helped them to reflect on their language use and communication skills while helping me to plan for the next session. So again, use these regularly with your students to help them to reflect. Questions that students can ask more broadly about self-regulated learning include, am I on the right track? What was not working for me? Have my needs and goals changed? And what resources do I have to help me find better ways? Now it's your turn again. If you were to describe the main ideas, I'm close to the end. So I want to see if you can share some ideas to others. If you were to describe the main ideas of this webinar to a colleague, what one or two phrases would you use?
Okay, so here is an opportunity for you to engage with your learning today. How would you describe this webinar in one or two phrases to a colleague? So let's hear from you. And while we're waiting, we have a question. Chandrahas says, what is an exit ticket?
Oh, okay. An exit ticket is just like a form where you ask students to complete, but you print it out like a ticket. So that's why it's called an exit ticket. It's like a reflective prompt that you ask students to respond to, but you may print it out in a more small ticket.
All right, we have a response. Jacob says engagement would be the one word to describe this session. Um, and then we heard from Sunshine, who said smart and whoop would be the two takeaways. We heard from Samia, who said productive and beneficial. Janet said assessment as a way of improving learning. So those are some of the responses we have as others are coming in. Camila, who says, great ideas. Thanks for sharing. And finally, we have a response from Konu, who says, informative and productive. So those are some of the responses. Continue the conversations in your viewing groups and online. Back to you, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing. Sharing something that you have learned is a good way of learning. So I encourage you to actually do it by sharing some of the things that you have learned through this webinar. Okay, so I have covered the 6 components of self-regulated learning here. Motivation for self-regulated learning, identifying needs, setting goals, making plans, task regulation, and self-assessment. If you want to think of ideas, try to remember ideas from today's webinar. You can think back of these 6 components to see what techniques belonging to these components that you can implement in your classroom. And here I want to also share a summary of insights that I have that I want to share with you. Thinking about motivation for self-regulated learning, you can think and talk about the why of lifelong learning and self-regulated learning and find at least one reason for any learning activity. Think about the power of habits. Habits help students to sustain actions while motivation can be up and down. In terms of making goals and plans, you can think of SMART goals as a way to do it, vision board, and the WOOP technique. Remember, specificity matters. Plans have to be specific in terms of where, when, and with whom. And finally, monitoring and self-assessment. And these should be incorporated consistently and frequently. You may use checklists, exit tickets, forms, reflective prompts. And finally, my last suggestion here is if you believe in self-regulated learning and you want to promote it further, then try different strategies, but also share them out. Share your strategies, share your practice with a wider community. You may already have ideas about what forms, checklists, and materials to use, so you can create those and also share them out also. This is a way of promoting self-regulated learning more widely. And remember, Whatever we practice will grow. We need to put things into practice. I want to share another insight actually. Knowing is not half a battle. We need to put things into practice to actually materialize any ideas and strategies. And so finally, in this session, we have recovered what is self-regulated learning, the 6 components of self-regulated learning, different techniques to promote self-regulated learning along those 6 components. And I have also wrapped up with other insights and shared some takeaways. Thank you so much for being with me and with us today. Here now is your time to take action. And as we conclude, take a moment to identify one insight or strategy from today's session that you'll apply in your classroom. Commit to putting it into practice and observe the impact it makes. So please share.
This is the most exciting part of every webinar session for me, to find out how you will use what has been shared today, because our goal is for you to have something practical that you can apply immediately in your next class. So what from what you've learned today will you be engaging with? Will you be sharing and implementing immediately? Please let us know in the chat or in the comments box. And we've heard from someone already, Lynn. Babacar said, thanks, Lynn, for this wonderful webinar. And WOOP is what will be applied immediately. And that was from Olga as well. Kanul also said WOOP and SMART will be applied immediately. And as some other responses are coming in from Van Lee, create the vision board will be applied immediately. Tina says SMART to track the students' improvement. Sunshine said helping students to realize the importance of SRL. Awais said SRL will be applied in our class. Back to you, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you so much, Darlene. And thank you for sharing some of the ideas that you are going to implement. I just want to comment that it's true for the WOOP technique. The advice is that you can do it regularly because students can focus on small goals and keep using the technique to achieve their goals, to plan and achieve their goals. So please, you can use these techniques as frequently as the time allows.
All right.
So finally, I want to share some resources with you. I mentioned the position paper from Oxford University Press. It's free, you can download it, and there are some blog posts that you can check out without having to download the paper. I have also written a really short summary on my blog at eduling.org. You can check out the WOOP technique. It is quite popular and it has been talked about a lot to see how you can implement it further. And I'm happy to stay connected with you through my website at eduling.org or through social media. So thank you so much again for being with us today.